One of the trends we observe is a shift in social attitudes towards more inclusion, which is great, but at the expense of moral standards, which is not so good. To help us understand what is happening, why, and how we can digest these changes, we interview today Mr. Fahim Mohammed, faculty at the MAI Institute and a doctoral candidate in leadership and society on these issues. We are seeing rise of transgender and other bizarre social trends. How do you explain that?
Well, first of all, let me say the rise of these issues give reason to worry about the future and the world our children will inherit. It seems as if everything is happening to prepare us for the coming of the Dajjal, a period where to be a Muslim will be a difficult proposition. But getting back to your question, you said bizarre social trends. There's a lot happening, yes, but it's not really that bizarre, and in some respects it comes as no surprise. It all centers around the feminist movement and their causes in Western society. Some of these trends we see today include things like the acceptance of homosexuality and, by extension, all manners of sexuality, really. Pansexuals, asexuals, bisexuals, intersexuals, and so on, along with the rise of issues like transgenders and so on. Many of these issues are not new. They existed even at the time of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be on him, although perhaps with less emphasis and media coverage compared to today.
But growing up, we did not have to deal with these issues, so why now?
Yeah, well, the truth is it has become more popular in the recent past, especially over the past 40 to 50 years. And what we have witnessed in that time is the rise of the feminist movement and the evolution of their cause. They started with very noble foundations, equality and equal work for equal pay, something that was reasonable and an issue that everyone could get behind and support, really, in the interest of fairness and in the interest of justice. Two genders working the same role should be paid equally, and there should be no difference based on their gender. And that was the cause that propelled the movement to its popularity and a lot of popular support.
That sounds reasonable and an issue everyone can support.
Yes, certainly. This was an easy cause to champion, and it was also easy to measure. Just look in an organization at two genders performing the same role and compare their salaries. What's interesting is, from an Islamic perspective, this was also consistent. You have the principle in the Quran, chapter 16, verse 97, whoever does good, male or female, would earn their rewards. So there were no issues here. Where it changed was when they switched from equality and moved towards freedom of choice. Firstly, to choose gender roles. The logic was women should be able to choose career over family if they wanted, and it should be acceptable to everyone. This led to a number of issues, the major one being abortion, or what we see today as pro-choice movement, because it had such a significant impact on the woman, physically, physiologically, and psychologically, and so on. But that was one of the major issues, and you had some spin-offs from that, things like deferring pregnancy and freezing eggs and so on, until women had achieved certain career goals and were ready to start families. But it was interesting to note in this shift, they began to lose support because although their banner was freedom to choose, they were not supportive of those who chose to be homemakers and who chose to care for their families and for their children as stay-at-home parents.
And that supports the subcultures of most Muslims in Trinidad.
Indeed, because they're smarter than us, these women. But for those who chose to stay at home, the movement wasn't very pleased with their response. We've seen numerous reports of women being expelled from feminist groups or pressured and so on for making that choice to stay at home. They were seen largely to break rank, if you will, undermine the cause, or go back into the corner that they were painted into by the evil patriarchy. So the movement began to lose support at that point. It should be stated from an Islamic viewpoint, there was little to oppose here. Women in Islam were free to pursue businesses, to pursue education, and generally be productive members of society, with some limitations on travel and limitations imposed on both men and women for dress code and modesty. So, however, having made that point, the feminist movement moved from freedom to choose gender roles, and their narrative evolved into freedom of sexual preferences. Here we saw the rise of the issues of GLB and its acceptability. Through legislation, they tried to gain acceptance of same-sex marriages and rights for adoption and so on. And they used and are using today the media to make the whole GLB agenda much more diffused and much more acceptable as a social norm. Of course, for Muslims, there's no support for this issue. On one part, marriage is the only legitimate basis for sexual relations, and by extension, homosexuality is an abomination, it's immoral, it's forbidden conduct, and we are told this explicitly in numerous ahadith in Islam.
Well, it seems today that if you don't accept GLB, you are homophobic.
Yes, and it's a convenient way to force the issue and paint everyone in with a broad brush. You either support us or you are homophobic. It becomes the argument. Another tool that they use is cancel culture. Will punish you economically for your non-support. And of course, as an add-on, we saw the issues of queers quickly follow. Men who choose to dress like women, and with that, we saw the increase in gateway practices like that of metrosexuals. Guys getting their eyebrows done, their nails, their makeup, and so on. All of this, of course, to make the lower moral standards more acceptable and more visible in society. And to achieve this, they use the media to celebrate those in support and highlight the acceptability of these practices. As Muslims, these mukhannatun, or effeminate ones, were frowned upon in the days of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be on him, and therefore we have precedent. The focus, of course, in Islam is not on aesthetics, but on your inner beauty, your conduct, and your intentions as you interact with society. So there's no support from Muslims here, as well as followers of other Abrahamic religions, as it relates to GLB issues. And as well, you'll find no support from anyone with a sense of morality and ethical standards for society.
And this speaks to the issue of transgenders and sexual reassignment.
Well, by natural progression of the narrative and advancements in technology, those who thought they were female now had the option to pursue treatments and surgeries and so on to become either male or female. The narrative was largely they should be free to do so if they wanted, using heavily criticized research and using social constructivist theory. They claim the concept of genders was imposed by men to keep women subservient, and it's more a nurture issue than a nature issue. So to achieve their agendas, they are using legislation in particular to force gender-neutral pronouns and gender-neutral facilities and whatnot. Of course, in doing so, they ignore science and the gender divide within our chromosomes that are embedded in our DNA. So as a result, they lost even more support here, not only from the moralists and the religious followers, but scientists as well, who can distinguish nature versus nurture based on evidence. And also those who believe in forcing your acceptance of your will on others, and who saw it as a form of censorship, have rejected their advances and their causes as well. In Islam, of course, it's clearly established in the Quran in numerous places. We created as mates, male and female, and there's no crossing the floor at will. More deeply embedded as well is you don't have the absolute individual freedom in Islam. You're expected to find that balance between individual freedoms and social responsibilities for which you'll be held accountable.
How do we treat with these issues?
Well, there are different dimensions in which you could choose to operate around these issues. On one level, there's the individual, household, and community levels. And at this level, we have to ensure that our children know right from wrong and encourage them in upholding the values and obeying the commands of Almighty Allah as laid out in the Quran and Ahadith. Keep in mind that they would be bombarded by counter messages from every angle. From you have the media, you have the internet, amongst their peers, and so on. So we can't really shield them from the issue, and it would be natural for them to question and to seek answers to questions based on these issues. A good response would be to become familiar with these issues and what Islam says, so that we can impart that knowledge as we need to and as the situations arise. I note the MAI, for example, has a social issues page that treats with some of these things. The Majlis ul Ulama has a paper that speaks to it as well. So there are some treatments to the issues there, and there's some guidance that we can access and avail ourselves of. At the societal level, for the media, we can, through our investments and our consumption, send a message that these media, these materials are unacceptable and refuse to support these trusts. I imagine there would be high and consistent demand, for example, for ethically and morally sound channels, which we can enjoy as and for our families. Also, it's useful to acknowledge the importance of lobby for influence on national agendas. As these issues become more diffused, it would be a perfectly natural aspiration of persons to have their rights, their freedoms, based on their beliefs and value systems safeguarded in law. What we have to decide is what our position is relative to these issues and what we are prepared to do on these matters. Things like networking and finding other groups in society with shared values tend to go a long way in mitigating changes that we want or do not want to see.
So what can we expect in the future on this issue?
It seems, based on their previous agendas, that the movements would want to keep their momentum going. So it's very likely that they would be looking to score points that they define as success against issues of the day and move on. What direction that would take? Well, there are a number of options on the table from which they could choose. On one part, you have the whole issue of gender-based violence and the Me Too movement. So that could be one possible course of action. You have racial equality and the BLM movement. You have class equality and the concentration of wealth by the 1%, and of course the counter to that being the Occupy movement. You have the whole thrust towards anti-nationalism and the nation state, with a preference towards anarchy, which is the sovereign citizen movement. So there are a number of options, and it all seems open territory at this point. What we can be sure of is changes would be constant, and not all may be consistent with Islamic values and beliefs. So we have to be clear on what Islam instructs us on, and ensure that, at the very least, we save ourselves and our families from the negative influences and from their consequences.
This brings us to the end of this interview. It certainly is an interesting dynamic, and only time could answer what the future has in store. Thanks for him for taking the time to facilitate this interview. To our viewers, we hope you enjoy this feature. We urge you to subscribe or follow us on your favorite social media platform for more upcoming interviews and events. We remind everyone that registration is open for our September intake on the Islamia program, catering to anyone interested in learning Islam to live the best life for this world and the next. You can get more information at MAIInstitute.com. We certainly look forward to having you there. Until next time, be safe and have a good one.